All right, so with this video, I want to walk you through your colonization project. Even though it's really not a project, we're thinking of it as a formative assessment, your goal being to learn how to self-educate a little bit. So you're going to be grappling with colonization, which, right, you've probably worked on in history, social studies, those kind of classes that might treat it as something that happened a long time ago, and kind of went away in the modern world, right? But in reality, that is definitely not the case. This is something that has influenced the world you live in, and whether you realize it or not right now, influences a lot of things in your lives, the things you see around you, the things you might believe, the way you interact with other people are all kind of given to us by the history of colonization, for better and worse. A lot of it is worse, as you'll find out. So let me just walk you through a couple things here. Starting on last class's lesson, I did ask you to do a little bit of thinking, specifically about how colonization might show up in your life. Kind of what are you thinking about right now? And for some of us, that might have been a little bit of a difficult thing to do, right? Oh yeah, maybe I'm not quite sure I can put two and two together yet. So I did, once this loads here, I did put an image of some intersections of identity. So on there, you'll see things like language. You're like, oh, hey, I do speak English. I do speak Spanish. These are both languages that show up here in North America, not indigenously, but because of colonization, right? Maybe the way colonization has spread, views about gender will show up. Same thing with sexuality, and that's actually most of what our first story we're going to read next talks about. Oh, maybe let's talk about class, right? Hey, maybe the people who are able to go to another country, or the people who have power in that country, also happen to be the wealthy people. Maybe that's not a coincidence, right? Well, we know it's definitely not a coincidence, right? Maybe the religions that show up in a certain place are a product of colonization, right? So turns out colonization affects some pretty important parts of our life and even our identity. And you might have realized that, right? Some of this stuff you watched, I hope you were able to watch most, if not all, of these videos here. One of them is a podcast, right? It's 54 minutes. I really encourage you to give that a listen. Really interesting. NPR's Throughline podcast is one of the better ones. Almost every episode of their podcast will address something like we're talking about right now. But you gave those a watch. You listened to John Green talk about Sierra Leone. You zoomed in on this map of country translations, which might not put two and two together. Who named the countries, right? Especially going into Africa and colonized places like Central and South America, right? Oh, Land of Columbus. That's named after what, an Italian guy. But here we are on the west coast of South America. Let's take a look real quick. Anything in South Africa, or South Africa, beautiful southern land, the best place, Ivory Coast, Cote d'Ivoire. It's a French name, right? This country in Africa just has a French name. Colonization. So you grappled with that. You shared with your peers. You read a little bit about what they said about themselves. And so here we are, ready to go into the next lesson. And yours will look a little different from this, right? We have a picture here of Rome's influence through legacies and a couple millennia of colonization. Right? The easy example is Alexander the Great, who expanded the Macedonian Roman Empire all the way over there. It's still colonization, even if it was a long time ago, right? Empire is just a very specific type of colonization. And then you can see here, the United States, well, maybe we don't quite realize, has completely controlled Central and South America politically, right? Keeping them pro-capitalist. US friendly by installing regimes, having strategic assassinations. And a lot of people critique our current kind of world affairs, especially in the Middle East, as just neo-colonialism, right? And so you'll learn a little bit about those things the more you do some research and kind of dive into these topics. We have a Kahoot. Hopefully your teacher sets up the Kahoot just for you to do some quick review. We have a Spanish version of the instructions we're about to go over as well. So we'll walk you through these. Once we walk you through, I'd recommend you checking out these different student examples from the past, a couple different ways students have grappled with this. So let's walk you through the actual assignment. So it is a research paper. You'll do the assignment through Canvas, through that Canvas page we were just on. You'll just hit start assignment. You'll have to be logged into Google. It'll make your own version of this document. And as you probably know, when you edit it, it automatically should update on the other end as well. So you'll fill this out, right? Why are we doing this? Well, anytime we engage with humanities, so like English, social studies, sociology, psychology, these like non-scientific fields, at a higher level, we just don't sit around and read a book and, you know, oh, that was a good theme, that was a fun character. No, it's like when you have real conversations, you bring in these other things, right? You do a psychological analysis of this. You bring in the history of whatever the thing is to further understand it, to see how it connects to these other things, right? And that's exactly what we're doing here. We're building this scaffold, this schema for you to understand complex ideas. And we're doing that through colonization. So the question that your project is going to answer is, how does colonization interface? How's it interact? How's it talk to a topic or issue that I personally care about? And we'll give some examples of what that could be here. And unfortunately, let's see, by yourself. So when I did this in class, I had it with partners and it didn't really work out. So this year, we're just going to do it with just us, or depending on what your teacher wants to do, you could switch it up as well. So there's some, I think 5 ways you could explore this question. The first one is going to be with a TikTok or some kind of similar short video. Really 2 to 3 minutes. You don't have to make a whole documentary. How could you communicate that thought about the intersection of this thing you care about and colonization through a video? You can also do it through a piece of visual art. In the past, I've had students do paintings, posters, collages, and a short write-up about your painting, what it's supposed to get across, whatever that thing is. Some of my favorite things have been memes, and right, so just like you saw on our Canvas page, I'm utilizing things like memes to help communicate the same thing, right? Hey, how can I teach someone about the intersections of capitalism and neo-colonialism? Hey, here's an iCarly meme, right? It's an effective way to communicate ideas. So here's an opportunity for you to get to practice that. The next one would be a scripted dialogue, right? So you're imagining a conversation 2 people are having, perhaps where they're like digging further and further into this idea, kind of unpacking the realities of whatever that thing is, right? Or it could be a PowerPoint, much in this style. And here I have an example of a PowerPoint that you could do. I believe when you open it, it'll just make a copy of it for you. So don't worry about that. So here's PowerPoint, and of course this is a template. It should not look exactly like this. You should modify it to make it look pretty based on your topic. So define the aspect of colonization you'll be examining. So colonization, huge umbrella category. So what part of colonization? So you might talk about power structures of colonization, or what's called hegemony. If you were in the junior class and you did the critical lenses, you might have talked about hegemonic lens. So you might look at how power intersects with, you could say like the fashion industry. And so it'll you'll be thinking a little bit about, okay, places with historical power, who are also colonizers, also kind of control the fashion industry. Places like New York in the United States, or Paris in France, right? Or Tokyo in Japan. All Japan, France, and the United States are all colonial powers, right? They've all had colonies or still do have colonies around the world. And so we'll give a couple examples of where this shows up, right? It could be Paris Fashion Week. It could be the exploitation of former French colonies to produce textiles, right? To produce cloth. Explain why it's worth caring about, right? And it turns out it's hurting people, so we should probably care about it. And you'll unpack that a little bit. You'll have some research, some examples, and then ultimately how it affects your life. I have an example in the latter half of this presentation where I do what we just talked about, but with animal welfare and how that interacts with colonization. So you can walk through that if you need to see an example. And you'll see I retitled some things in a way that makes more sense for my particular topic. The other thing I do want to note is when you are like quoting or pulling facts off of websites, remember you have to attribute that. With this project, I didn't want to spend a ton of time, like definitely not MLA formatting it, and definitely not doing a whole fancy bibliography. But definitely if you are taking resources, I want you to cite those. So whether that is through hyperlinking them, including the website, just doing a quick in-text citation, just so your teacher knows that you're not trying to pretend like all this knowledge comes from you, but that you are synthesizing multiple different resources. And that is about it. And this should give you maybe a brief example of like how long each slide should be, definitely utilizing things like bullet points. And all in all, that's the assignment, right? So we're not doing this as a big summative. If you look back at the sheet here, it's only, I believe, 3 standards, because really this is just you practicing maybe for the first time, learning how to do research. And this is just that first step into that research. So we have lots of different topics here. I've had students do some really interesting stuff about medicine and healthcare. Sports is always a popular one, right? How different sports get transferred, how sports maybe distract from other power structures. Sexuality and gender, we already mentioned, is going to be a big focus of the next story, but that's definitely worth exploring deeply first. Use of social media, it's crazy. For example, in Southeast Asia, Facebook was one of the leading causes of like a military re-uprising, I believe. In the Philippines recently, they had an election. A lot of that was kind of fiddled with around with social media. So pay attention to those things, the things that you find personally interesting, or maybe that have to do with you, your background, your family, whatever. Here I do have a little note catcher, just if you want some help keeping track of the different sources you utilize and how it might fit into your project, whether you choose the PowerPoint or the memes or the video. I have some terms I want you to practice using, right? Colonization, colonialism, decoloniality. Some of them maybe you haven't heard before, but they're definitely worth discussing. Having accurate language to describe things will always make you a more thoughtful thinker. And finally, down here, we have the rubric if you want to check out what it's really being graded on. Well, I hope that recorded, because the last time I tried this, it didn't. Definitely reach out to your teacher if you have questions or concerns. And I think we should have a fun project. And after this, we are starting our first story. Awesome. Have a great